Welcome to the Mystical Mermaid Lounge podcast, a space where all spiritual seekers are honored and celebrated. This podcast was born from the journeys of your hosts, who have each faced her own dark night of the soul, but they've emerged with an unshakable belief in divine connection, cosmic inspiration, and her true life's calling. Join us on a journey of personal growth, transformation, and magical self-discovery. Your first co-host is Chloe Brown, a gifted intuitive empath and shadow work life coach. Your second co-host is Chione Starr, an intuitive energy worker and acclaimed past life regressionist. The Mystical Mermaid Lounge podcast starts now.
Hi, I'm Chloe.
Hi, I'm Chione. Welcome to the Mystical Mermaid Lounge podcast.
Chione has recently returned from a beautiful and glorious trip overseas with some friends and loved ones. And I'm hoping that today she can share that story and her takeaways, not only with me, but with all of you listeners.
Yeah, thanks, Chloe. I like to choose a location that speaks to me, then kind of get my thoughts together around what it is I want to see when I get there. And I do a little bit of research, not a whole lot, but a little bit of research to make sure that I'm in tune with the places that I'm going to be traveling and make sure that I get what I really want to get out of it during the downtime that we have. But I think this experience heading to the Netherlands over March of this year was really gave me an interesting time to do some introspection on not just external, what do I want to see, where do I want to visit, because the trip itself was delayed by several days due to the substation fire that impacted the electricity at Heathrow Airport.
What are the odds?
Right. Been planning for this trip for 1 year. And then I am on a flight with my sister to Heathrow. And after several hours, I hear an announcement that we will be landing in an hour. And just to give you all a heads up, we'll be back in Baltimore, Maryland, not Heathrow Airport. And I think as sleepy and as out of it as most of us were when that announcement came over, we all kind of thought maybe we were hoping we were having a nightmare. But it was truly stunning. We found out that way that we were about to land right back at the airport after hours of flying, right back at the airport that we had departed from.
That's how they told you guys?
Yep. The pilot came on and said he was happy to announce that we were getting ready soon to land. And we all kind of looked around thinking, well, this flight's only about half over, right? Maybe we were in a time shift. Maybe something happened. And he said, that we would be heading back to Baltimore where we departed from. And everybody just kind of popped up looking around like, what is going on? And that's when we were told that he had been asked to turn around because of the fire at the substation near Heathrow. And there had been over 1,300 flights, I believe, that were impacted by that fire and the electrical problems with the airport, and that these 1,300 flights had to be diverted, and some of us were being sent back to our departing city. So my sister and I were trying to make heads or tails out of what to do because she and I were heading to Amsterdam to begin a tour. And the tour was going to go from Holland for a couple of days and then go to Maastricht and then go to Trier, Germany, and to Luxembourg, and then wind up in Brussels. And everything hinged on this tour starting in Amsterdam. And we only had a couple of days to get there before the tour moved on. So that was a little bit unnerving, but I will say my sister did a yeoman's job, just a little Navy terminology there, did a yeoman's job getting and working with the travel agency to get us rerouted out of a different airport that wasn't as far away to get us to Heathrow in time to eventually get to Amsterdam before the tour moved out of that city. So that worked out. But I think the biggest thing that she and I had to deal with was not having our makeup, not having our hair products, nor having anything that was in our regular luggage readily available, because while we were stuck at the airport, our bags were also stuck at the airport in a place where we couldn't get to them.
Oh, that's terrible. Please tell me you packed at least a few spare pairs of panties in your carry-on.
I wish I could tell you that.
Oh gosh.
So after, I think what she and I figured out, we had been in the same clothing for 4 days. We finally get to Amsterdam. Yeah, it's smelling lovely. Trying to not look any worse for the wear. Meanwhile, I had just had a peel done not too long prior to that, and my skin was flaking off like a snake. Every time I moved my head, these huge flakes and then these small flakes were flying off my body. In fact, my sister said it was somewhat disgusting. I left a pile of skin debris behind me wherever I went. It just wasn't the look I was going for.
You're speaking to the lizard people out there.
I felt like a nut, and I'm in the same clothes. I feel disgusting. I need to rinse my underwear. My skin is flaking everywhere. My socks are now so they can walk by themselves. So we finally get to Amsterdam, and we're waiting and waiting and waiting for our luggage. And we've walked into the bowels of the airport at this point. The customer service people, don't worry, the people from your flight, they've already picked up their bags. Yours just probably went to a different belt. And we're thinking, yeah, after 2 hours, that luggage was lost. So we ended up having to file a claim for our luggage. We did not get that for another 2 days. And so my sister and I had some close moments with some nudity that it's a good thing she and I are twins. We shared nudity in utero. I don't know, this is probably way too much for.
Oh my gosh, I am dying over here with laughter. Sorry.
But anyway, at least we were able to finally shower and start the tour looking a little worse and a little flaky for the wear, but at least we did. We got the tour started, and we said to ourselves, you know what? We made it. We're safe. We only missed a couple of things that, yes, we had wanted to see, but we were assured that if money was the issue, we could get some money back, blah, blah, blah. So we decided to make happiness our choice. And we decided to not fret about the hair products. So we bought hats, and we decided to not fret about our bare faces. So we wore sunglasses in every picture. And we decided to look outward and not inward and just enjoy the moment for what it was. And possibly one of the worst experiences we've ever had traveling. But like I said, when it all comes down to it, we had life, we had limb, and life was good.
You made some lemonade out of that, lemons.
Whew, man. I was struggling. My sister, I think, was struggling more than me, or it could be that she's just blatantly more honest than me.
Mhm.
People were saying, "Hey, how's it going? We don't have our luggage yet." Alrighty then.
That would be me in the group.
And okay, I was really just asking you if you wanted schnitzel for lunch, but it's good to know your luggage hadn't shown up yet. So anyway, we did meet some very nice people and had some close friends on the tour too, who were very generous with combs and brushes and deodorant and toothpaste. I mean, all that stuff. People do, even for something that seems minor, they do realize that you're in a vulnerable way when you're wearing the same clothes day in and day out. And they did
Right.
rally around us, maybe not as closely as they would have had we had our own deodorant, but they did rally around us. And so the airport, let me just say it this way. I never knew this before, and I don't know if this is something specific to the Amsterdam airport, or maybe this is just on the DL on all airports. But when they say we will definitely courier your luggage to you, let us know where we need to send it. What they're really saying is if we find somebody who happens to be going your way in the next week or so, we'll get a hold of them and maybe add your luggage to that vehicle. If you're lucky, it may get to you. And so, fortunately for me, I found somebody who is willing to give me that little detail. And
Wow.
so I made a couple of extra trips. I didn't go to some of the tour spots. I didn't get to see the Hague, which was a little bit disappointing. And I didn't get to go to a specific pottery place that sounded like it was super cool. And
Wow.
I didn't get to stay at the Keukenhof to see all the tulips and the daffodils as much as I would have liked to, but I did get a super cool taxi driver to take me to the Amsterdam airport. And as we're driving to the Amsterdam airport, as I decide I'm taking this situation into my own hands and I'm picking up my luggage myself and I'm not
Atta
going to
girl.
wait for a courier, right, to make it his way to Amsterdam airport. I get into the vehicle and the most kindest driver ever talks to me. Hi, how are you? Are you visiting? Yes, I'm visiting. Thank you for picking me up. I need to go to the airport. Do you want me to wait for you? You know, all the typical conversation. And out of nowhere, he says to me, I'm Moroccan. And I said, wow, that's so interesting because my sister is dying to go to Morocco and has already established that that is where we're going to be visiting on our next international trip. And he said, you'll love it. We have the best food in the world. And so
Yum.
he begins to tell me about Morocco. We finally get to the airport. He gives me his card. Please call me if you need any other travels while you're here in Amsterdam. Yes, no problem. I go wrangle my luggage out of bowels and depths of the Schiphol airport. And I finally come back with 3 bags. Thank God they all have wheels going in the opposite direction. I heard these cats of bags of luggage get another taxi driver. And we're talking as he's taking me back to the hotel. And he says, I'm from Morocco. And I said, you are?
No way.
Funny you should say that. My sister has decided that next year we are going on our next international trip to Morocco. And he said, you're going to love it. They have the best food in the world. And I thought, is that the country tagline? Go to Morocco. We have the best food in the world. Anyway, he tells me about his family, tells me how kind everyone is there. And I am so just blown away by his friendliness. And he gives me his card and he says, if you need any other rides while you're in Amsterdam, please give me a call. So I'm finally
Definitely.
catching up with my folks who are already been at the Keukenhof. already looking at tulips and daffodils. I get my third taxi driver on the way to the Kuchenhof from the hotel after dropping off the luggage that I have missed so dearly. Yeah, but I did take a few moments to reacquaint myself with some of my own deodorant and hair products. But
Yes.
despite all of that, I get into the taxi that the hotel has called for me. And what do you think? The national origin of my driver is
Moroccan. Did he
And
advertise the food?
the first thing he says is, "We have the best food in the world." I couldn't have asked for three more lovely people to drive me. I trusted them instantaneously. I mean, they talked my language: food, fezzes, Moroccans. And on top of it, the last taxi driver said to me, "I'm a little concerned about what's happening in your country." And I said, "My country?" He said, "Yes." And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry. How so?" And he said,
Uh-oh.
"With Mr. Trump." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I'm thinking, Chione, this is not the time or place for you to spew your own personal opinions on politics. You're in a different country with a different economy, with a different political system. Let's hear what someone else thinks, right? So I said, "Please tell me, what are your concerns?" And he said, "I believe that Mr. Trump is very good and very bad." And I said, "How so?" He said, "I think he's going to be very good for all of us if he can stop the Russians attacking the Ukrainians. And I also think he will be very good for the world if he can stop the Israel-Palestinian conflict." And I said, I agree that those things would be phenomenal if they would end for everyone.
Mhm.
And he said, "And I think he's bad for everything else."
No. Oh my gosh.
And I just started laughing because that was his opinion.
What are you
And
going to
he's
say to that?
what do I mean, it's his opinion. I've learned a long time ago. Was it Sun Tzu who said, "Only a fool tries to convince someone that his opinion isn't right"? So I listened, and I said, "I completely agree that those two scenarios would be wonderful if they ended." And he said, "You Americans don't understand what it's like to be part of a country that is surrounded by other countries in conflict." He said, "The world is a lot smaller than the United States realizes because you're surrounded by the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean." And I
Wow.
thought of that viewpoint and I said, "You're right. I mean, we have generally very decent relations with our northern neighbors, the Canadians, and our southern neighbors, Mexico. We are not in conflict with those countries, and North America as a whole is in peace as a whole."
From
Uh,
their perspective, yeah.
from that political perspective, we're not in strife. We're not fighting with each other. They're not fighting with each other or fighting anybody else. And he said, "Yeah, for me to see Israel and the Palestinians fighting, or to see the Ukrainians trying to defend themselves against Russia, is a little too close for home. Because who's to say if and when it escalates, when we're all going to be impacted?" And so I continued to listen to his viewpoint. And he said, "I just don't understand." And I said, "What is it you don't understand?" He said, "Allah is good." And I said, "Allah, I forgot. You're Muslim, correct?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Right. Everybody has a who God is, whether it's source, God, goddess, all there is, Allah, Yahweh, whatever it is we want to call it, we all have a sense that there is a higher being." He said, "Absolutely." He says, "Allah tells me to live in my house over here and you live in your house over there, and we each do our own thing, and we each believe what we need to believe, and we get along that way. I don't understand why you would have to come from where you are over to where I am and tell me who I have to pray to and how I have to live.
I
And I said,
agree.
I don't understand that either. He said, you're not hurting me, and I'm not hurting you. Why do we have to tell each other how to live? And why do we have to impose our own beliefs on anyone? If we live knowing that Allah is greatest and that we treat each other as children of Allah, then we would live in peace and harmony and just go on, have families to love, be with our friends, and just live. And so I congratulated him on solving the world's problems with me. Well, I mostly just listened. And then I hopped off and went into the Kuchenhof, and a very wonderful woman allowed me to go into the gardens and visit without my ticket because I did not show up with my group. And thankfully, she could tell I was trying to meet some people that I had missed and believed me unbelievably without having a ticket to get in. And then I was able to catch up with my tour people from there. But those discussions with all three of those Moroccans really set this stage and reframed my position of that trip from that point forward. So three people from Morocco who had their families had been subjected by imperialist Dutch, whose families came to the Netherlands to work after being ruled over colonialized Dutch, ended up showing me what it felt like to be happy to be alive, to be from a country that had the best food in the world, which I am going to pretty much assume is true because schnitzel just does not have a whole lot of taste. I'm just saying. And it's not bad, but I mean, come on, schnitzel. And they were so happy to be alive.
Yeah, that zest for life was infectious, it sounds like, in such the most positive, beautiful way.
And the first thing I did when I caught up with my group at the Kuchenhof was take a couple pictures with a Dutch shoe. My sister could not wait. The whole reason she wanted to go to the Netherlands, once she realized that that was where I said we're going to go every year, she chooses a place and then I choose a place. So we alternate back and forth. She was like, if I don't see myself in a Dutch shoe, that's it. The entire trip will have meant nothing to me. So we both jump into a shoe, and I realized that at this point in time, her trip's been made. For me, it was just beginning because I finally have my hair products. So life was good.
And in those photos, were you both wearing sunglasses and hats still?
Yeah, I'll have to do some photoshopping so people know who we are. We were just so embarrassed to just be barefaced and just not feeling like we put our best selves forward. It's a very vulnerable thing to be a female, and when you're used to presenting yourself a certain way, it's just a vulnerable feeling.
I think as humans, we can identify that. We can all identify with that a little bit because, at least in my world, all the humans I circle myself with are very routine based. And so it's not necessarily about whether I have the makeup to put on. Personally, I don't even wear makeup, but it's the routine of which that I'm completing that makes me feel comfortable. It's not the products that I'm using in said routine. So I think a little bit of all of us can relate to that, regardless of what it is, whether it's not having fresh socks or panties or a t-shirt or hair product, not being able to complete that routine, right, on something that we've looked forward to for so long and we've saved for and we've researched. And
it was funny. There was a guy that was on the tour, and he said, I just have to tell you both. If this had been me, I would have thrown a fit at the airport. I would have screamed and kicked the belt when my luggage didn't come out. And he said, and I'd probably be on my way back home right now. He said, that is a nightmare. You turned around in mid flight. You had nowhere to go. You end up sleeping in how many airports and then having to drive to another airport. And then you don't have your luggage. Like he said, I don't know what. I mean, there was just like one bad situation on top of another. And I was just laughing because my sister and I don't even top out at 5'1". We would have looked like old toddlers throwing ourselves on the ground, throwing a fit over a piece of luggage. Yeah. If I don't get some hairspray now, there's going to be hell to pay up in here in Amsterdam. It taught me a couple of really, really important things. One is to never go without some extra underwear on you. Yeah, not physically wearing them, but definitely on my carry-on bag. That whole adage of it'll never happen to me, it'll happen to you. Yeah. And thirdly, if you are really that concerned about not having your mascara, then pack a small travel tube with you so that you can hold on to it like your lucky rabbit's foot. So those are the things that I have learned through my time without luggage and wearing the same clothing. My sister, she's all about getting a refund. So I'm sure once she gets reimbursed for
I am that person in my friend circle. I want my money back. Dang
I
it.
want my money back. That was that. The other thing I wanted to share about this trip was I had the opportunity to go to Trier, Germany, and it was an optional excursion that I'm glad that I did opt in for. One, we got to stand in the foundational area of a Roman bath that was built in 4 AD.
Wow. What is all of that? Obviously, it's in Germany, but I don't know anything about it.
Right. So I had seen some Roman baths that were very, very old, obviously from the Roman times when I was in France. And I was just blown away at being in a place that had such deep history where you could see the actual construct of a building created and not touched since that period of time.
Wow.
Obviously, all of our land has that history, but how often in the United States do we stand and get our hands on something that was built at that time period, right? Because our Native Americans do not put things on land that then stands forever to be in disruption of the flow of life. So I'm standing at this Roman bath, and they're giving us the history of how people would come to the Roman bath for community. It's really hard for us to think, Chloe, I haven't seen you in ages. Let's go bathe together. It's really not something that our culture can
So awkward.
understand. Yeah, awkward. Meet me down by the bathtub. I got so much to tell you. We have so much to catch up on. There's a level of just cultural awesomeness that is just hard for us to wrap our heads around. The second thing is they were able, in a time period where plumbing is not what we imagine it, to run water for 6 miles from a river to a bathhouse. That was huge. It was a huge building, and it had been built with handmade bricks that had no mortar holding the bricks together. And this thing was still standing. And so for a house, well, in the case of my house that was purchased a little over 2 years ago as new construction, and having my husband's bathroom drywall peeling off and crumbling after 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
to see something that's over 2,000 years old still standing without
Wow.
any mortar between the bricks was just amazing. So there's that level of just being awestruck when you're standing in that. The thing that was super painful was understanding that while people in the community who were more in the higher classes were using that bath as a place to commune, as a place to catch up on politics, as a place to catch up on family events and such. There were slaves in the proverbial basement who were literally shoveling and scraping stuff out of the sewage lines that were running beneath this bathhouse.
To maintain the bathhouse itself for said community. Am I understanding that right?
Correct. And
Oh,
so when the different pools were drained, people had to slop out all of that drainage and sewage after the toilet area had been used and the waste was flushed down. These guys had to handle that hazardous material, and so you could feel that different, just that different feeling when you were in that portion of the bathhouse where the slaves would have worked to keep things pristine and warm and operating perfectly for the people of the upper classes. It just makes you reflect on what we consider to be upper class versus lower class and who actually does the rough work behind
yeah.
the scenes. Because these people were underground, they weren't even seen. So it wasn't like you and I have done service jobs.
Yeah.
We may have worked in restaurants, we may have worked in retail. We were there, we were seen. These people weren't to be seen.
So tragic. So awful.
Yeah, they're in the dark shoveling human waste.
Shit.
Yep. And after we looked at the bathhouses and we moved over to a portion in Trier where some other tragic things had happened. And we found out that this then began the major witchcraft trials and movement in Europe as far as the persecution of people who were either found to be witches, were accused of being witches, or were tortured and had to give up names in order to presumably save themselves, but ended up dying anyway. And so we're standing in a marketplace and it's just gorgeous. And it was cool because the American Embassy, McDonald's, was right on the corner. And so,
Wait. Are these one and the same? I'm dying to know because I think a lot of non-Americans could have an opinion on that statement.
I cannot take credit for that joke. Our tour guide said, and as you can see, here's a building that was built in the Gothic era. Here's one that was built in the Renaissance era. Here's one that was built in the more modern time. And across the street is the American Embassy, McDonald's. And yes, there was the big yellow arches. And we
Gosh, that's
laughed. And
hilarious.
then half of the people on our tour probably went over there and grabbed some McNuggets. But despite all of that, we're standing in a marketplace that is as gorgeous and cobblestoned as you can possibly imagine from thousands of years to hundreds of years ago, and know that over 300 people who had been accused of witchcraft had been killed there. And when I asked the tour guide specifically about it, and she told me a few more details. I believe there were 320 some people that were initially caught. She said a good portion of those were actually isolated in small type of cabin shack places. And so they're by themselves. They're fearful. They know what they've been accused of. They know what the church believes in doing with people who have been accused of witchcraft. And they were somehow convinced, and I say somehow, convinced to give up 10 people. And if they could give 10 names, we believe, or at least the tour guide believes, that perhaps they thought they'd be released and they'd be able to go back to their families. But in fact, they were killed anyway. And it gave
10 more.
It gave the impetus to then go grab more people and more people
Gross.
and persecute them and kill them for witchcraft. So when I was doing some research, it was found that most of the people that had been killed for witchcraft were primarily herbalists and or foragers and made homemade remedies.
So the medicine woman that didn't make the man happy got reported as a witch.
Correct. Or there were some people that I had talked to afterwards who also mentioned that if a female's family had money and the male wanted to get his hands on it, the best way to remove the female from the picture and for him to get hold of her wealth was to accuse her of witchcraft, insanity, cavorting with the devil, any or all of the above. So I did a little bit more research into that and found that within, I forget whether it was a 20-mile radius of Trier, Germany, that 1 out of 2 women were killed during that time period in every village within that specific area. And so the juxtaposition, right, of standing, and this is not intended to be funny, of standing with a McDonald's in front of me and with opera houses and cathedrals and basilicas and Roman baths, right? To know that all of this culture and growth and progress, while all of that was being done, and we could stand there in amazement, that there was still this level of persecution, whether it's in the basement of the bathhouse or whether it's females, primarily females, who had been working on home remedies or had a knack for foraging and using mushroom for certain things, or just happened to be drawn to the moon for whatever reason.
I've actually read a lot of documentation that states a lot of, I don't know how they did or didn't prove this, but they do say that a lot of the accusations came from kind of what you just said is a man's way to figure out how he could just resolve the problem. Because back then there wasn't a divorce, right? And women were not people, they were objects. So that is really 1 out of 2 women. Is that what you said?
That is what my research showed. 1 out of 2 women were killed during that specific time period of the Trier witch trials that then began a movement throughout all of Europe. It triggered a movement throughout Europe. Amazing.
So, as somebody who's not educated, I think that would absolutely qualify as genocide, wouldn't it?
For sure. And gross misogyny.
That's an understatement. That is so disgusting.
And so my sister and I, one of the places that she and I had heard so much about was Bruges, or as they say in Bruges, they call it Brugge. So we went to Bruges. What's that?
Sorry. Could you feel that sorrow? Did you feel like was there monuments and anything to pay respect to that? Was that mostly just you seeking out that type of tour? Did it stand out as part of the representation in that community? Or would you even know it was there if you weren't a part of it?
It wasn't where we were, which was surrounded by cathedrals and extremely old churches. And the interesting thing was the Catholic and the Protestant churches had an architectural showdown. So,
Wow.
where one on one side of the city of Trier would, where the Catholics would build a just absolutely gorgeous cathedral. And this spire at the top of the church would reach however many hundreds of feet high in the air. The Protestants would answer with another cathedral that was slightly bigger, but with a spire and a bell tower that was taller than the Catholic Church. And then the next time the Catholics had time to build and maintain on their cathedral, they added a couple of bricks higher to that. So the Protestant versus Catholicism showdown that was done architecturally was super amazing. And you cannot not just be amazed at what these people built with their hands, and I'm
Yeah.
sure they're slaves' hands, to
Right.
be just so amazing. But there was nothing because of, and I'm saying this as an assumption, there was nothing there that specifically spoke to the witch trials. I asked our tour guide specifically about it, and she was quite knowledgeable. But we were not in a place where those people that were persecuted and killed, we were not in a place where they were recognized. When we got to Bruges in Belgium, then we found it. We found an entire, they called it a witchcraft museum. And I thought it was going to be super kitschy and they would have silly wands on display and maybe pictures of old pictures of displays of people in capes. It was not that. It was lists and lists and lists of people killed
Oh,
and why. So it would say Chloe killed 1716 as an example, herbalist.
wow. And who's
Chione
there being
killed,
honored?
yeah, 1812,
Whatever the
agrarian
allegation is.
and farmer. And so while there was some kitschy stuff there, it also showed, for instance, the pentacle and the pentagram, but also the definition beside the pentagram and how it was east, north, south, west, and the spiritual pole that the star actually related to, as opposed to it all being 666 and demonic. In fact,
Right.
I don't think there was one mention of demons or negativity in that entire museum. Although, if you want to talk about negativity and demonism, right beside the Witchcraft Museum was the Hall of Torture,
Oh,
which my
no
sister
way.
and I had to go into.
Well, why wouldn't you? I have to know.
And every single appliance, modality, torture mechanism that you could possibly think of had already been created. And if you want to think of whether something is evil or demonic, think about what we have been doing to people. In fact, some of those torture mechanisms in some of the countries listed just stopped in the 1950s.
That's so sad and so gross. But I think, like so many other disgusting topics that have unfortunately seeped into the beauty of this story, such as the slavery and the difference between social classes, we still talk about as far as when did they stop? Have they stopped? Did we just transition the label? Wow, that's so sad.
The barbarism is has always been there, right? And the ability to torture each other for whatever reason has always been there. I think the thing that got me the most with the torture mechanisms and the different punishments were two that were not incredibly painful or incredibly hurtful outside of humiliation. was what was called a braid, which was essentially made out of what you make rope out of, right? And so you would braid a rope, these fibers, which, rope or twine, those types of things, they're not soft. They would put it around your head, almost like you were being measured for a hat, right? They would put it around your head and then let this braid hang down your back. And you were essentially humiliated by wearing that braid by the public because you were a gossip. And do you know who they put that braid on? Women.
Of course they did.
And also, if you were a pot stirrer or a gossip or someone who just essentially loved drama, they would make you wear an iron mask so that essentially, I think there was something on the inside of this mask that fit into your mouth so that essentially you couldn't talk. And those were made for women as well.
So I may be a little off key here, but I feel like we're hitting one of my sensitive topics. So essentially, this was patriotism at its finest, and what we still see in modern day playing out. Because if a woman has a problem with something, it's dramatic and emotional. But if a man has a problem with it, it's facts. It needs to be addressed. At least that's my opinion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the braid was used for young women, so maybe a teenager. So she learned early on to keep her opinions to herself, right? And then if you just couldn't be deterred or you said something that was so, for whatever reason, maybe reality, who knows, or you had an opinion, or for whatever reason, someone deemed whatever you were saying to be so dramatic that you were not yet deserving of being drawn and quartered per se, but it was enough where you needed to be humiliated and also silenced, then you were put in this mask with essentially what looked like a ball gag type of thing. So, and and this is, we won't go down the ball gag route, because I'm talking right now about, persecution of women for things that, not what some people enjoy for their extracurriculars.
Right. We're talking about egregious behaviors, not something that could be
Fun.
anything other than that. Yeah. No,
Right.
that is so disgusting to me. It makes my stomach turn. And I feel like the little green emoji right now. Like, I don't know if I'm going to get sick to my stomach just thinking about that. Like, it's so disgusting. And I don't need to get on a rant.
It is humiliating. It's like being put in a stockade, but right, the stockades were where you humiliated people, right? You threw rotten food at them. That also was shown, but we're all pretty used to, not that it's a good thing, but we're kind of used to seeing that image of public humiliation.
Yeah, the Muppet Babies kind of helped desensitize us to that as we grew older. I hear you.
Exactly.
Following.
I think the thing that got me most about the braid and the iron mask was not that it was more than just the fact that that's humiliating, right? It was more than just the fact that they only put it on women. And they said that. I mean, clearly, this is what was used for women who were gossips, as an example. But the braid, after a while, because of the fibers, would wear your skin raw, right? So you had that permanent mark. For older women, this iron mask was heavy, like maybe 10 pounds that you're wearing around your neck. And it's rubbing because it fit over the front of your face and then had a collar. So you couldn't just
That's
take it
terrible.
off. And it was fastened on there. And if you remember seeing um, the old Halloween masks that had the beaks that came out of the front, it had that too. So that adds extra weight. So these females were identified and then humiliated to wear these things. And then eventually it hurt their heads, it hurt their necks. And what can't you do? You can't sleep because
Well,
you
that's
haven't.
the whole purpose of all of this is to make them clearly a second or lesser than type of citizen with no value, demoralize them, treat them like I would never even want anybody to treat a mouse in my house, if we're being honest. And that's a pest in modern American culture, right?
No, by
I
now,
still
but they are
would never
so
do
cute.
that to an animal. Right. That's my point. And that, oh, it's boiling my skin. That's so gross. It makes me so angry. And I think it ties into why we need to always recognize what our energy is feeding into. Because in the moment, it may feel right to be a part of the collective, but is it really the right thing to do?
You know, you're right, because oftentimes the collective is not used for good. It becomes a mob mentality. And it made me think of something else I noticed. And this is not something that we don't think of when we think of the Middle East and religious persecution of females who do not wear their burqas or their hijabs. Or we think of women who have been found guilty of fornication or adultery and are stoned to death. The other thing that obviously still happens in the Middle East because of religious related uh, or sin related persecution that had been also punished in a variety of horrendous, painful, torturous ways was homosexuality. And
It
so we
still
know about,
is very much
and very much
across the
still
board in
is.
lots of cultures, sadly. And that's
Yes.
why we're here doing this, to let everybody stimulate their own thoughts because the collective, like you said, often is not
Becomes a
helping.
mob mentality, right?
Hmm.
And there were torturous images, and the torture museum, they had a lot of tools and devices that you could see and touch and really put yourself in a position where, for instance, this is one thing they did to men, which I just can't fathom this, but especially if you were a gay man, they would impale your anus down onto a pike or a spike, which
Talk
it
about
just,
egregious.
yeah, I just can't imagine. It was interesting to go in there because you could imagine looking at some of these old implements. Or you could look at that braid and feel it and know that because you were considered a gossip, that you would wear this thing and it would, wear the skin off your head. And so therefore, once you had the braid removed, you were still branded, right? Until and if you eventually healed. And there was also something else that reminded me of the religious persecution was the crown of thorns that they would put on people as well. And that had some level of religious implication, but I don't recall at the time.
What a heavy feeling that must have felt like being there in such a sorrowful yet historic building where you want to pay homage to the culture and the history and those who have not had proper justice through millennia. It sounds like, wow, that's a heavy burden to try to bear, to be in there and to repay respects. That's heavy. That's hard. Did you feel all of that in there as well?
You know what I thought was really commendable? Of course, there's something about, and I think you even said it earlier, about a train wreck, just the bottleneck that happens when you go past it in a car accident or something heinous. There's just something human in us that, if nothing else, we want to know what happened. Well, I went halfway around the world to score a pair of earrings, if you'd like to hear that one.
Oh, please. I actually love this earring story. You shared a little bit with me.
So, one of the things that I love to do when I'm traveling is to find a little tchotchke, and it's usually jewelry related that is either handmade or inspired by the village or culture that I'm visiting. And I just like to feel it. I like to wear it. It's not because I want to publicize to the world, hey, I went to Amsterdam, or hey, I rode on a boat through a canal in, Voldenhall or whatever. It's mostly because I look at these things as I'm getting ready to put them on and I think, I was there. How cool is that? And it still has the energy of the place or of me or of my sister saying, my luggage isn't here yet. So it makes me laugh. It makes me giggle. It makes me smile. It might make
Yeah.
me sad, whatever it is, right?
It's an expression of love. I don't know if everybody knows this about you, but what I've learned about Chione is you're not going to these foreign countries to, buy this big name brand piece that's going to sit on your neck and you're going to say, look at how bling bling I am. No, you're going for something that's handmade, that's made with, a form of art that shows an expression of love from each culture. Just to clear that up for those of our listeners who are not lucky enough to know you firsthand.
Right. Or they may mistakenly think I can afford the Hope Diamond. Uh, and would I wear that thing if I could afford it? Probably not. I think everybody should see that amazing piece of carbon compressed for how long and just feast their eyes on that gorgeous gift from nature. But I digress. Plus, it'd be a little bit heavy around my neck. I am only
Just a
5 feet
smidgen.
tall. But anyway, so I'm looking and looking, and the one thing I will say, and this is always the way when you are on tours that are being guided, you can only get 1/1000th of the places that you want to be when you're in a place, right? It's unless you live there, you're just not going to be able to experience any and everything. Although I will say one thing that did give everybody that was on this tour a pause was that our tour guide, who is from Amsterdam, but we saw some homeless, unhoused people of different ages, and it wasn't very many. And of course, we're going to areas that are more touristy. So the prevalence of seeing that is much lower than what you would experience, obviously, if you lived in a place and saw non
As the
touristy
local.
areas,
Mhm.
right? And he looked over to the side where we happened to be passing some unhoused people. And one of the individuals seemed to be talking to himself. And the tour guide stopped whatever he was talking about, educational information he was giving us. And he said, and sadly, and I'm afraid to say this, and I've lived and guided tours all over the world. He said, I have yet to find any country that homelessness does not exist. The look on everyone's face at that moment, as they looked over and they viewed the homeless, was somewhere between major compassion and just wishing that that didn't have to be a reality for people for
Yeah.
whatever reason. You could just tell this group of people, they honored those people by looking over and not shaking their heads in disgust or saying drug addict, all the things we happen to hear. It
Without
was
judgment.
right. It was compassion. So back to the earring story. So I'm looking for my version of the Hope Diamond, which is, as you mentioned, something that would be indicative of the culture and the art of that place. And everywhere I go, and it's probably because we're going to these touristy areas, they are more the things that you may see in mainstream or just bulk accessibility, right? The different jewelry stores in different places. And so I didn't want something like that. I wanted something specific to the area, something that spoke Netherlands. I should have just bought a pair of little wooden shoes and hung them from my ears because that to me would have been the shit, right? I mean, that would have been cool.
Yeah.
And I probably would have had my sister chasing me whenever I wore them. But regardless, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. That when I would just giggle and put them on, and people would say, "Why are you wearing shoes on your ears?" And I'd be like, "Don't you?" And no, not really. Mine are yellow. What color are yours? Type of thing.
Mine are on my feet. That's just a thing
Yeah,
currently.
right. So by the ninth day, which is, I'm coming to the end of this tour, which was just absolutely wonderful, particularly once, and the last time I'll speak about hair products. But again, once I finally got my hands on those, I'm getting to the end of this tour. I'm on the ninth day. And I said to my sisters, as we're entering our last hotel room, I said, this isn't working out. I have not found one pair of earrings, one bracelet, one tchotchke necklace, something that I can say this was the Netherlands to me. And she said, Chione, you have 24 hours. Get over yourself. You're giving up already. And I said, I think I am. I just don't see this happening. So we're fighting to get in the door and who's going to take the bed closest to the bathroom. You know, all the typical stuff you do when you get into a room that you have to share with someone.
With your
And
twin.
with a twin. And I decided to take the bed that's closest to the desk. I think that makes me look industrious, while my sister would tend to look like she has to pee a lot because she's taken the bed closest to the bathroom. So I take the bed closest to the desk and I'm looking at the desk and I realize there's something on the desk. I lean over and I pick up a small plastic package of earrings. And I'm looking at it and I notice that in the package, there's a business card. And the business card is a handmade jeweler's business card that she slipped into the package. And I take the earrings out and I'm looking at them and I realize that these handmade earrings have come the whole way from Ohio.
Just like
I'm
you, kind of. Different state, but across the ocean.
And I said to myself, self, what are the chances of me saying, I'm never gonna, like Eeyore, I'm never gonna get any earrings. And me finding this beautiful set of earrings lying on this desk.
From
So
America.
I don't know if someone's left them behind or if my guardian angel has left them for me. So I stopped kvetching about it because everybody's sick of hearing about it already. So I take these earrings and, of course, I bring them home. And I notice on the back of the business card, it says how to clean these earrings, that they are handmade. They're made from upcycled products and to never wear them if you have a pacemaker. And so that is the first piece of jewelry, which tells you the kind of jewelry I buy, that had a warning on it. Just call me crazy. I've never had anything with a warning sign on it before. But
Not when it's jewelry.
When you're manifesting gifts, you can't be super picky. You got to kind of take what the angels leave behind. And so now I'm really sort of curious how I got these earrings merch that can't be worn with a pacemaker. So I did reach out to the artist to see what she has to say and whether she actually accidentally left these behind, or maybe she left them for me, felt compelled from her store in Ohio. Maybe she's looking to go international, start a chain. I don't know. But as soon as I find out what she says, I will be sure to let you know, Chloe. But in the meantime, I am going to be very careful who I wear these earrings around.
Right. When I heard this story, I could not get over the fact that you went across the pond, I think they say, to find earrings from our own country when the whole purpose was to find something local that spoke to you in an artistic way. But then, as somebody who was speaking to you through this, knowing how deeply concerned you were that somebody purchased these and left them behind, and how
Right.
early panicked, I think I could say, fairly, you were to try to connect these to the beautiful soul who must have just left them behind. But it did distract you from your, deep dive search that you had been on for 9 days for some local art. But then when I heard you could not wear these with a pacemaker, instantaneously, as I'm talking to you, I am feverishly Googling. But yeah, I'm eager, and so curious to hear back from that artist. But also from Ohio, and you were in all of the countries. That's so crazy to me.
It really is. And on top of it, I'm dying to wear these earrings. And I don't feel that I should wear them until I know whose they are. Because if they're mine for sure, I'm gonna wear them.
They're beautiful.
Yeah, they are super cute. The other thing I wanted to say, because this is a podcast for spiritual seekers, is that the spirit, and I hope I did justice, the spirit that I felt, for instance, of the baths and it being a community place for people to gather and to connect, and just the amazing spirit of that culture in and of itself, just imbued within the remaining standing brick walls, that just totally blows my mind, or the plumbing that has extended for over 6 miles laid by hand, is just as visceral as that sadness, or just even the awareness of things that people have been through throughout time, right?
Yeah.
You and I are super similar, Chloe. We feel things. She and I both admitted to each other in a moment of vulnerability, not quite as vulnerable as my sister and me fighting for the bed near the bathroom, but close. That she and I both at times can hear our plants talking to us, and or maybe talking back to us, because I know we both talk to our plants constantly, either internally or out loud.
And I have some sassy ones, so that's so true.
Yeah, it's his damn cactus. But I warned you about them. But here I am looking to get some hops. I'm getting plants with double meanings or double purposes.
Yes, you
Um,
could tell everybody. My Pacific Northwest friend told me about these, and we're trying to blend the communities.
um, yeah, so I want to make it clear that the way I felt in those different places, or in talking to those incredibly generous taxi drivers who went out of their way to talk to me about their perception of the world and how to just solve the strife, was not lost on me. In fact, that's part of the reason why Chloe and I felt it was so important to share that experience.
Mm-hmm.
So we feel it in the land, we feel it with the water, we feel it with the materials that people made these stunning cathedrals, and how humanity has not changed that much through time. And you can feel the sorrow, you can feel the inspiration, you can feel the creativity.
The value of community, all the beauty that comes with that, and then the duality of what making that looks like, I think is what you are very beautifully articulating.
The yin and yang of it all, right? Somebody's got to work this thing, and they were hidden away. Yeah, to make another population or another class's experience top notch while they were doomed to shoveling sewage. But the other thing that really super surprised me, and I don't know why, because I mean, I am not just the person, like when my kids took things and colored in Barbie or Snow White, and they were all outside the lines on the coloring book. And I was just thinking, my God, this is gorgeous. They're the next Van Gogh. And I'm pulling that coloring sheet out of the book and I'm plastering it all over the refrigerator. I'm not just that guy, right? Because I knew that my children wanted to create. They took crayons and they did the best they could and felt proud of that, right? So yeah, I am that person, but I'm also the person that went to the Rijksmuseum and I'm standing in front of this painting that is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old that was painted by Johann Vermeer. And a lot of you may not even recognize the name, but you'll recognize one of the paintings, which is the girl with the pearl earring. And you can see her with the profile with this little earring. And it's just so inexplicably Dutch. And you don't even know why you know it's Dutch. It's just, you know it's Dutch. And I'm in the Rijksmuseum and I'm looking at these paintings by Rembrandt and Vermeer. And I'm just standing there. And all of a sudden, I got chills going through me as I'm picturing these people holding these paintbrushes. Or Rembrandt was big into sharing the paintings. If it was a colossal painting, as an example of a huge scene, he and other painters would work on one big project together. So their communication between each other, look, I'm going to do this portion of the ship and the captain, and you handle some of the, the sailors on the ship, and you over here, you'll handle some of the people that are, standing around watching them christen the ship or whatever the object of the painting was. And
Wow.
I realized that not only am I standing in front of something that is so old and original, but that I just can't escape the creative spirit just vibrating off those paintings.
That's beautiful. Gosh, that's amazing. How could you not feel it though? That's beautiful.
It's a good point. So, I had to commemorate this. And because I didn't have any luggage, I did buy myself some socks. And it did say Vermeer from the Rijksmuseum. And I thought, I am wearing those socks, which were very comfortable, by the way, but I am wearing those socks and feeling that spirit for the rest of my life or as long as their stitching holds up because it was just I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to lose that. And I said to myself again, self, I have got to stop finding magic in places outside of where I live. I need to open up my eyes and see it everywhere.
Yeah. You do see the beauty in a lot of things. I think you're harder on yourself than you realize.
I definitely know that the thing that makes beauty super easy to see when you're outside of your own realm is because you're outside of your own realm and you're outside of your routine. And so it's easier to focus on those things. There was a couple that was on our trip that was coming from Copenhagen. And they too, because of the Heathrow scenario, had problems getting their luggage. They chose to be miserable for, I would say, 80% of the trip. They got their luggage a lot quicker than we did. So to me, I'm like, you have deodorant? Do you have socks? What the heck is your problem?
Why are you angry?
I'm, I'm actually angry thinking about how quickly you got your luggage. But anyway, I thought to myself, okay, well, we don't know their scenario, right? It was a married couple. Maybe they were having marriage issues. Who knows? But they were miserable and they were not appreciative of what they were seeing around them. And I could tell that, and you'll always have when you're on a tour and or you're in groups of people, you will almost always have people of all different ilk, right? Different realities, different thought processes coming together. So you can't expect everyone to react the same way.
I think the American phrase is you always have that one.
Yep, in this case, we had two. But by the end of the trip, we're at our farewell dinner, and I heard them say to someone, "This will be the last time I come to Europe. They hate all Americans, and they're just plain nasty." And I looked at my sister, and she said, did they just say that they were treated nasty? And I said, yeah. She's like, what tour have they been on? I said, I don't know. She said, they've been miserable since they got here. And I said, law of attraction, maybe.
Perception's reality.
And
Mm,
you throw out, isn't that karma? What you get, what you give. So for
yeah.
whatever reason, they felt miserable, and maybe people reacted to
Yeah.
that vibe. So
Yeah. I mean, you know me pretty well, and I really do like to play devil's advocate to try to understand both sides because as a human, it can become very easy to find judgment without even recognizing it. And so, playing that role in this conversation and using myself as the vulnerable suggestion or example, I've absolutely been that person. There was one trip that stands out in my mind that I had saved for an exceptionally long time. It was to connect with an old friend that I had put on a huge pedestal. I had finally gotten enough vacation time to make this cross country trip. I had to take a flight. And, being prior military, I was pretty used to flights. So I thought it'd be breezy. And at that time, I still always checked all of my luggage. This is the trip that changed that forever.
we all have one.
Yes. Yes.
I'm sorry to
And
hear it too.
yes, it's awful. And that's why I think I can have so much compassion because I can understand there was so much without recognizing it on my end. I had put so much expectation on this getaway trip and reconnecting with somebody who I had already put on such a high pedestal that when, flight after flight got canceled and I finally end up a couple days later showing up, I still had no anything, whether it was medication, makeup, panties, socks, didn't matter. I was lucky enough to be able to just go to a Walmart and pick up some stuff, but it really threw me off my game as a female. I had started my menstruation in the middle of that flight, and so I internally turned on my own self, and then just the lack of luggage on top of that just compounded the issue, right? So I felt disgusting and I felt awful, and the trip went pretty much how I was feeling about my luggage. And I can, in hindsight, absolutely see that it's because I took that attitude into the entire trip and I never let it go. I would like to think I'm not that person anymore, but I can see, having been that person in the past, how easy it can be to be consumed in those. Well, I just paid all this money. I finally got all the vacation approved. I just finally made this once in a lifetime trip. Not to justify it, I can just understand, even on a regular everyday without other stuff going on, how easy it can be to get consumed into those moments of not our best self.
That is incredibly insightful because I think it's super easy to look at someone else and say, dude, you've been miserable since you got here. Um, people of asking you, how's it going? And you're snarling. And, you know, in Europe, as an example, in most places, you have to pay to use the toilet. And once you've been there, you'll never forget it. You always make sure you have enough euros on hand to get into the bathroom. They don't have public bathrooms.
I would be so broke. I pee every 5 minutes and I'm not pregnant.
you you learn to apportion your water intake carefully. um, and
There's the yin and the yang. You're not spending as much on water because you're afraid to go pee. Sorry,
and
I
so
digress.
and they're miserable but having to pay to get into the bathroom. And the European mindset in a lot of these places is, look, I'm not running a public bathroom, I'm running a restaurant. So, you can't pull up to my restaurant and 50 people roll in and then say, "Oh, we're good. We ate. We just got to use the toilet." So, it's you gotta just roll with it. And wouldn't it have been nice if they would have noticed that they were very responsible for the response they got?
How interesting is it that he blamed Americans for all of his attitude problems? So I wonder if that was because perhaps subliminally there was a portion of them that recognized, wow, I am really giving off a shit attitude. Yet these Americans who got their luggage after us are still able to try and enjoy some time here. Yeah, they may be wearing these huge sunglasses and giant hats on their little tiny heads trying to hide, but they're still giggling and having a good time. And maybe something inside them wished that they could just let go like that. Interesting. Very interesting.
I just have one statement to leave with people, and then I'll hand it to you, Chloe, to see if you have anything else to add. As a repeat of one of our earlier podcasts, happiness is a choice. And secondarily, see the magic and the special qualities around you everywhere.
Yeah. Seeing that beauty in the mundane, for me, has been the key to unlock the whole world. Thank you for joining the Mystical Mermaid Lounge podcast. Constructive and positive feedback are always welcome. Drop us some fan mail at mysticalmermaidlounge@buzzsprout.com or email us directly at mysticalmermaidlounge@yahoo.com. Finally, we do not accept sponsorships or ads so that we may bring a less distracting message to our listeners. So, if you are just as passionate as we are about educating and supporting spiritual seekers, then please brew some tea or joe and pour us a cup at buymeacoffee.com/Mystical Mermaid Lounge. Thanks again and catch us at the next high tide. Bye-bye.